Welcome to Bradford and Brooks with your host, Margie Bradford and Jim Brooks, live on WBRT here in downtown Bardstown. The show is sponsored by Springview Hospital in Lebanon. Thank you for listening to 97.1 FM, 1320 AM, and 94.9 FM in Lebanon. Bradford and Brooks, a civil discourse of discussion where community involvement is encouraged. Bradford and Brooks is on.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is Bradford and Brooks, Jim Brooks and Margie Bradford with you this morning. Well, Margie, it's not very sunny outside, but certainly I'll take these temperatures.
I will too, as long as it doesn't bring a tornado along with it.
Oh, I know. And our hearts go out to the people in Western Kentucky. Well, actually, Western Kentucky, South Central Kentucky, and all over Kentucky who were affected by the many tornadoes in severe weather that struck across Kentucky. Margie, years ago I was involved tangentially with Kentucky Emergency Management. And at one of our seminars I went to, it was fascinating. There's almost at least one weather-related disaster or emergency in Kentucky every month. Doesn't matter. And of course we had tornadoes in December, which isn't.
Right.
And we talked about that at this conference. It's not as common as summertime, but it's not that uncommon either. So
right.
Anyway, but yeah, the weather is one of the biggest threats to Kentucky.
Yes.
As far as emergency management, of course, emergency management is all about providing resources when they need them, and certainly, I'm sure those guys are really busy now trying to get resources to the parts of Kentucky.
They're starting to occur so regularly, we're going to have to stop calling them that.
Right.
They're not seasonal, they're all year round.
I know it. Well, Margie, we're happy to have our studio guest with us today, Wes Bradley, Superintendent of Nelson County Schools. And Wes, it's good to have you on today.
Thanks, Jim. And I also just want to comment, I think the tornado conversation that's happened in this past week speaks to, I think, some of the many challenges that we've that have impacted schools and communities over the past 2 years with the pandemic and the instability with that, and the colleagues across the state, the educators in our schools in West Kentucky and across Kentucky that have been impacted. Our heart goes out to them. We've had a lot of conversations this week with superintendents and principals in those areas and what's it look like to support them. And I think the reality is their needs, I think, and will play out over the course of the next 6 months to a year. Mm-hmm. These types of events can impact communities in ways that you can't see in the short term.
Right. Now, you had shared with me over the weekend or first of the week that some of the athletic directors were getting involved in some relief efforts. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. The local high school athletic directors at Bardstown, Bethlehem, Nelson County, Thomas Nelson, I've been working on some connections with athletic coaches and directors in that part of the state. Those personal relationships are important to knowing what the real needs are. Mm-hmm. And I think listening to the people there and thinking about how that plays out in the next few weeks, in the next few months will be an important relationship. So that's they met yesterday, and I think forwarded that conversation. And good to see the high schools coming together for those efforts.
Would this be in terms of just supporting the program or in replacement of items, or what would that look like?
There's a gentleman down at Mayfield named Mike Rogers, who was a coach at Nelson County High School, actually in the 90s when I was there. Mike's at Mayfield now. They've been working with Mike to hear what are some of those needs and how can they provide some items that he feels like will be relevant. As you know, part of the challenge right now is the overwhelming amount of support in those areas, trying to determine, sort through what's needed now or what's needed 6 to 8 weeks from now.
Right, and you, as somebody who's not in the area, you wonder, well, what's the best way to, support them? Is it, toilet paper? Is it, various household things, or is it,
Right.
or money? Because money will buy the things that you can't think of that you'll need.
That's right.
So, but anyway, our hearts go out to those guys, and we I know that the governor and lieutenant governor have both been touring some of those areas as well. Wes, we've seen the. I'll have to touch on this. The long-term planning. Local planning committee. I'm getting my committees mixed up. Met and concluded, and there's a district facilities plan that is in the process of being wrapped up. And I guess next Monday there'll be a public hearing?
Yeah, public hearing next Monday at Thomas Nelson High School.
Right. And once that there's a report generated from that in the plan will be forwarded to Kentucky Department of Education.
Yep, and the department, I think, takes around 6 weeks to review that, and will likely be on the February board meeting for Kentucky Department of Education, which would then allow the Nelson County Board to act on any item if they so chose to.
Right. I think it's important to note that nothing in a facilities plan is mandatory that has to be acted on.
Right.
I mean, it's basically a list of priorities and for the board to review.
Right. Yeah, and I think the big conversation over the last couple of months on the LPC was looking at equity for all students. So how do we have more opportunities for more students? And I would say, if we look at this conversation that's happening right now across the state around environmental disasters or the pandemic and the challenges that's placed on stabilizing communities or schools, I think that the community campus conversation at its heart is about being more resourceful and being more agile, flexible for a future that we know is going to move. And whether we say it moves faster, yes, I think we can all assume that due to the nature of technology and the workforce, education and learning is going to move faster. The change in education is going to be more significant over the next 10 years than we've probably seen in the last 100 years. Right as soon as they invented the automobile and the bus to begin transporting students to consolidate in the 20s and 30s.
Right.
So, and that's not it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It is, right? The market will demand it. The market of labor and the market of capital economies of that will demand that there is some shifting of resources. So,
all right, and I think it's just common sense that of resources, if you can gather them in one or two spots, it's more efficient to operate that way than having them spread across an entire county.
Well, I think it depends on the in the let's say 1969 Nelson County High School opened up, and with that there was some consolidation that occurred at that time.
Right. There was this considerable comments and feelings about that.
Right. Yeah, and I wasn't alive in 1969, but I think that we recognize the world was different in 1969 than it is in 2020, soon to be 22. I think the way learning occurs, the four-wall classroom with really the teacher at the front and center of that process. While there's still many remnants of that in our classrooms today, we know that that's continued to shift and will continue to, I think, pretty significantly over the next decade, and really into what does learning look like 30 years from now? Hard to say exactly, with the impact of technology, and I hate to bring up Facebook and what Facebook has done with what they're calling the metaverse. But the metaverse, essentially, it would be a great example of if that becomes an educational complex, then what is that? Who chooses to be a part of that, right? Who chooses to learn through virtual reality? There may be people that do that, especially as we think about the future of the home with more people working from remotely from their homes.
Well, when you just kind of think about it, people are carrying around in their purse, in their pocket, what used to be contained in the school library.
That's right.
And then some. Yes, and then some.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to fearmonger on technology, but I think we also know that there are some losses in that, and that the impact of whether we want to look at the impact on community over the last 70 years is also the rise of television and digital media.
Sure.
I think we all know that there is some relationship to that in terms of people's ability to not necessarily feel like they're living in the same place their whole lives. That's impacted it. Technology's impacted that, the labor market.
Right.
But we're very fortunate in Nelson County. So we're fortunate in a couple of ways, I think, in this conversation. One, we have had a lot of resources compared to some of the counties in Kentucky.
Right.
We also have great people in our county who've continued to lead not only within our communities but within our schools. We've been very fortunate to have that. And we've had a lot of great educators and still do have a lot of great people in our schools leading that work. And in our communities, and people like you who are really hosting conversations in our community that continue to connect people and ideas. That's something that most communities don't have. And I think we're very fortunate in Nelson County. We're very fortunate in the Nelson County schools to have the people that we have that have continued to be there, not only during the pandemic, but for 30, 40 years. I just met with a team member who has I did a mid-year conversation with a team member who's been working for the Nelson County Schools for 42 years. And she's hoping to work till she's 65, which will be 47 years. So, her wisdom and her ability to see the forces at play and sit with them and lean into people is really, really powerful.
Well, I think I think you're right. I mean, Nelson County schools, you can't find a bad school in Nelson County, I don't believe. You just can't.
No, and I think if you really go into the school, like any school, you go in, the people, you get to understand the people in those buildings. Schools are fundamentally good places to be. Right. There are moments in time in any school, in any community, where there's a breakdown in that. And I think the pandemic has also made that, I think some of the inequities that exist, the haves and the have-nots were exaggerated, have been exaggerated over the last 18 to 20 months.
Yeah, exaggerated and exacerbated.
That's right. So I'd say exacerbated for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Who has the right crystal ball for looking into the future for what education will look like?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say 2.5 years ago, you never would have convinced me that we would have months of education from our homes.
Right.
Yeah.
I know I heard many complaints, about, and not everybody was good with technology. People didn't have internet, but I mean, there's been a pretty steep, not just learning curve, but getting the technology together. And I think there's been tremendous progress on. I think all schools are better have a better grasp on what's needed for that sort of distance learning.
No doubt. I think that, some schools and districts were probably better suited than others for that shift. And at the same time, I think we also know that most students are going to be better off at school with other students and peers.
Right.
And especially we've seen that in the lower grades. We do have for the first time ever, we have a connected campus. It's essentially a virtual school that exists, but we have very few students in that this year. Around 25 students are a part of that pilot program.
Right.
And we were very restrictive in access to that program. We wanted to make sure you could be successful in those programs.
Right.
And if you were not previously successful in a virtual world, you weren't really accepted into that.
Right.
At the same time, I don't think that school and the power of those social relationships and that hub of community that exists for kids is going anywhere. I think that it's going to continue to be even more and more important as we think about the future relevance to local community building, local economy, and attracting people from across the state to live in a community. It's going to be an important piece. Most parents, if you had to say, I would like to homeschool my kids, they're not going to check that box.
Right.
There are a few that may have interest in it, especially as they think about some of the challenges that exist with the pandemic. But I think we're on the other side of the pandemic right now in schools. I see quarantine going away. I see masks going away. And I think that 2022 is going to offer a real opportunity to experience stability in a way we haven't for the last 2 years.
Well, I think that, for example, the Christmas parade, I think everybody's ready to get past it. And of course, you mentioned schools and kids being in them. I think most parents understand the value of that, just for so many reasons beyond education. Socialization, opportunity for leadership. It's a better place for kids sitting at home in front of the computer is one thing when it's needed, but certainly the what you get from being in school goes well beyond the classroom.
Well, you learn from other students.
Sure,
Maybe
you do.
Just simply being around and being together.
Well, I was at a wedding over the weekend, and a classmate of mine from high school who I hadn't seen since high school, the groom was, or the bride was his niece. And he and I had physics together. Of course, at Bethlehem, we didn't have physics. We walked up to Bardstown High, and we had Mohammed Shams as our physics teacher.
Shams. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, what a great teacher. I loved Mo Shams and still do. But anyway, he had a very rigorous class in physics.
He did, absolutely.
And so it was three of us from Bethlehem walked up there, and this classmate of mine, he and I worked together because I didn't absorb it as fast as the other guys did. So they kind of pulled me along with them, but I worked with them, closely trying to get that A in physics, which I eventually got. But I worked hard for it. But anyway, collaboration with other students is so critical.
It is. You do that.
You don't think about it when you're a student, though.
Yeah, I think learning is social for most people. There are certainly people who are highly independent and can work alone. That's not normal, but it's something that does exist. We know as kids get older, they become more likely to be able to do that. In terms of the local planning committee process, I think a couple of conversations that came up too was around the impact of taxes, and I bring that up only because I think that part of what the last 2 years has also made more abundantly clear is this fear of government excess. I think the pandemic and the spending from the federal government has created a real fear in most communities, especially rural communities, of excessive handouts, if you will, and all the federal monies that are perpetuating this debt, national debt. So
in other words, what's being done to help them?
Right. Well, I think there's people know that more money does not mean better experiences or greater value. And I think that fear has been going on. It's not a new fear. It's been going on for as long as the government's existed. But it's more evident in the last few years, I think, especially as we transition from Trump to Biden, from Obama to Trump, all those conversations federally, and that drives the national news narrative. So nationally, we're talking about things that are pretty much driving what's in most homes in our community. So I bring that up to talk about that conversation with money and taxes, as we talked about in the process. And really, ironically, sometimes you have to spend facility money to save money year to year. And we've talked too about the facility tax money that exists is separate from all other money. And it's restricted really because politically, when that money was initially put in place, it was there to ensure local infrastructure and buildings and those people connected to that were provided with long-term opportunities for construction, et cetera. And we're fortunate that it is restricted, because if it wasn't, people would find all the reason in the world to spend it,
Right.
and you
Exactly.
wouldn't have facilities.
Right.
You know, Bardstown City Schools has been going through some really healthy facility conversations as well, not only with the elementary school but with their future and connecting their campus,
Right.
which is already connected, but they're really connecting it even further.
Absolutely.
And I think they, and similarly with our conversation as Nelson County Schools, you look at Bloomfield Middle School was built as a byproduct of the nickel tax. 26 years ago, the nickel tax, 30 years ago, the nickel tax really took hold, and they were to build Bloomfield Middle School, Bloomfield Elementary School, Boston School. Thomas Nelson remodeled Foster Heights, Cox's Creek School. All these schools were part of that facility funding model. They would not have occurred if we didn't have that original nickel.
Right.
So
exactly.
that's just some things to connect here. But I want to come back to the tax conversation. We also recognize that in order for us to do more for students and teachers, to do that, we have to be more thoughtful in the way we design our system. And right now, we have some of the most expensive infrastructure that exists because of the size of our schools. And we know that local elementary schools are an important part of our future in Nelson County. In fact, we accepted a $700,000 preschool grant last night that will allow us to expand preschool opportunities in New Haven, in Boston, and in Bloomfield beginning next year and into the future. And that's really an important part of our conversation as well. But the middle and the high school functions, what kids need at that age level, we know it's really essential that we can do that in a way that is long-term financially sustainable, that also provides what I would say world-class opportunities and facilities for our kids. So, that conversation was a part of the local planning committee process. It's a part of our conversation with the Nelson County Board of Education. With that said, this fear of government waste and the fear of government really excess and is not going to go away. Right, that's not leaving us anytime soon, and I think that narrative has been on attack. It's been on attack, obviously during the pandemic, but long before that. But I'd say even more recently, as we come out and we kind of have a settling across the United States, there are unique conversations around school boards and school districts, and a lot of it really comes down to how do we politically control the government and government entities? At the end of the day, it's pretty much the narrative, and I think that in Nelson County, we're going to have to really be able to have conversations that work towards a shared vision for our community and for our students, a way that we can talk and have conversations about what matters most to the future of our students and our communities. And I think the local planning committee, while full of controversy and I would say, and many times misinformation, and I would say kind of social media fear mongering, that was a big part of that conversation, and will probably still continue to be because that's just a part of the way the world functions currently. The reality is we have a really powerful opportunity to talk about the future. We have such a powerful opportunity to talk about the future of learning and schooling that comes as a byproduct of some of this transition. And I think if it's allowing people to see that opportunity, that's really the work of the next 6 to 12 months, because I think I shared with you guys this United We Learn conversation from the state, and it really talks about the future of schooling demands a very close relationship with families and a very close relationship with communities. Schools are the hub of community and have to continue to build trust and build empowerment of the students and families that are within there. And I would say, as an educator in Kentucky, being here for 10 years, this is the most exciting document that I have seen from the state of Kentucky because it moves past that federalism that was really about command and control of federal money that all was driven through kind of this fake accountability system. And I say fake accountability system because you fill in the information and you make compliance and everybody gets their federal funding next year.
Right.
But that's not real. That's not the real world of what exists in schools. It's not just like that's where I think there's another great irony is federalism is really behind a lot of what we've experienced in schools over the past 20 to 30 years. These are what we would call systems of accountability.
I know, and the school systems have struggled with that because by the time you get it formulated at the state level, send it down to the local level, then the next administration comes in and changes the whole thing.
So on page 8 in United We Learn, if you can find this online, if you go to Kentucky Department of Education, United We Learn, it says the current approach to state and federal accountability and assessment sends a message of distrust, breeds competition, and plays a powerful role in making stakeholders feel like numbers or cogs in a machine that is accountable to state and federal entities. And I bring that up because I think part of the narrative is schools are only as successful as their test scores. Right. Well, the test scores in 5 to 6 years, I can assure you, whatever system exists now will no longer exist. And I think the value of what is going to be created has to come through local accountability systems, local data sharing with families and communities about what matters most. Because I can assure you that if I set those assessments in front of you today, you'd get a good laugh out of what the federal government or the state government that bought these assessments for millions of dollars thinks is important. Like, how important is that in the future of this child's life, and how important are these skills? Well, there's an important part of the process going through learning.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think the federal government is even recognizing, the state governments are recognizing that these systems are essentially telling about 80% of the world that they're not very good. Right? So there's not a lot of value in that.
It is. I'm on the school board a long time, and I know that's exactly what happened.
And I think this does a nice job of talking about working with families and stakeholders locally to build communication that allows for a shared understanding of what the goals are of the classroom, the goals of that school. And that's really where the work is going to create value. I have personally worked in schools that had very low test scores in urban areas, and those teachers in those areas were doing great work. Right, they were doing amazing things. The schools were in many ways high functioning, but the poverty rate was almost 100%.
Right,
and the percentage of kids that had college-going parents was almost zero. Right, so those things all impact that. In the same way, working in Nelson County schools, I was a part of schools that had high efficacy in assessments and accountability, and saw a lot of success, and also saw why those things were actually working against the child at times. We know how to increase test scores. If we want to increase test scores, we can increase them. You talk about test scores, you monitor test scores, you monitor data related to the test scores, you teach to the test, you take away recess, you take away the time and space that you might say this is not contribute to test scores, and then your test scores will improve. It's not a complicated process. That's not going to be the future of education and learning. And I think that while I think there does need to be local data and accountability to literacy, reading, writing, numeracy, math skills that provide a foundation, there also has to be much more than that. And I say much more in the sense of the way kids can communicate with others, speak, collaborate, contribute, show up, be a part of a team, those types of things that we know the future is going to demand.
How are we going to get away from that need of that we seem to have right now? Is where are you in where's your test scores? Where do you rank? How do you how do you get away from that perception to what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple too. If you look at the rankings, it's pretty simple. The richest schools in Kentucky have the highest scores, and the poorest schools have the lowest scores.
Right, exactly.
And that's generally 85 to 90% consistent. I think that the way you get away from the ranking is you have to have systems of accountability that are really more value oriented, looking locally at the systems in place. And I think that's something that that's the political challenge right now too. Is
Right.
on one hand you have this conservative mantra that accountability only comes through ranking,
Right.
right?
Right.
And on the other hand, you have this kind of like I would say more, let's lack of a better term, democratic mantra that schools are trying to do everything for all kids, and or that test scores do matter, especially based on equity, meaning how are we supporting those students that are most challenged? So either way, you've really not gotten out of this comparative model. The difference is the lens you're looking through. Is it just comparing all schools, or is it looking at race, or is it looking at poverty? I think the biggest thing is local communities and local school districts are going to have to be really assertive at sharing a vision for the future that gets beyond it. If not, the status quo of the traditionalism will eat the progress. And that's where I think local school communities, and I'm so proud that the state of Kentucky has taken on this conversation and is saying this is what we're hearing from voice of educators across Kentucky, because it really speaks to the heart of what we're trying to do in Nelson County.
Well, I know that, of course, over the year, in the last few years, especially even since my son was in school, in the county schools, there are programs that are going on, and when you're thinking test scores, and for my years of covering school board, it's almost always been hail to the annual test scores. But you've got kids building airplanes, you've got kids doing all these other things, and there's no test for that. You can't really test. There's no standardized test for some of these skills these kids are learning. But certainly, I think what's more valuable, teaching to the test or teaching or experiencing life skills.
Well, yeah, and I'd say too, to be clear, local assessment and accountability is important, especially as we look at foundational skills in the early grade levels. Preschool, first grade, second grade, all the way up. It's important. I think we also know that telling a kid that's a 5th or 6th or 7th grader, hey, you're not good at these things, and telling their parent, they're not very good at this, look at this score.
Yeah.
They're a novice, or they're a whatever they are.
Yeah.
We know that there's zero value in that. And I think where there's value is empowering people with information that they can use. Empowering them to say, here's currently where you are, here's some ways that we're going to continue to grow. And obviously the state and federal assessment programs they're not able to do that. Locally, we can do that. And I think that's where the real power comes, is in building systems of clarity. And that's really, last night we in our board meeting, we talked about our priorities for 2022. And the phrase that we're using, I say phrase, it's an idea. It's basically a learner profile. You'll see that in this United We Learn as well. They're calling it a graduate profile, a profile of a graduate. We're calling them empowered learner profiles. So what does it look like for a student that is in preschool to be an empowered learner? It's very different because the family is so involved in that, but we have to identify that as opposed to a 5th grader or a 10th grader, right? Or someone that's about to graduate. And, I think that is something, this empowered learner profile work over the next year is going to be really important. And I think you guys will enjoy seeing those conversations. We're going to be relying upon community leaders and businesses and organizations to be a part of that. As well as families and students.
All right. Well, Wes, we need to get a commercial break in for the top of the hour. You're listening to Bradford and Brooks, and our special studio guest, Nelson County Schools Superintendent Wes Bradley. We'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned. All right, you're back with Bradford and Brooks here on WBRT. We'll be with you till the top of the hour. Margie Bradford and myself, and our very special studio guest, Nelson County Schools Superintendent Wes Bradley, has joined us, and talking about a hodgepodge of things. I know that, Wes, as a superintendent and the board as well, You're looking at a moving target down the road in the future. What's education going to look like? What will be the needs for the district in, going down the road 5, 10, 20 years? So, I don't know. I think that's you can't avoid those conversations. You've got to make your best, use the facts you have and move forward.
Yeah, that's right. I think there was a conversation I've had with a few people in the last 7 months about, some people don't think this is a good idea. In fact, a member of the LPC said no one thinks this is a good idea.
Right.
And I can tell you that if we waited until everybody thought it was a good idea, we would not change a thing. And we would not recommend to change anything. I think that's a reality, as well as, board members and superintendents should never take a job. They should never assume a job that they're only looking to self-preserve and ensure that they get another contract or another election, right? If that's the case, then you've got the wrong people. And unfortunately, government bureaucracy breeds that. It breeds just stick with the status quo. Make sure what they say. Don't rock the boat, if you will. And I think that's an unfortunate thing, because I think the government systems typically do reward that, and we're not trying to play into that narrative. We're trying to do what we think is right for the community and the schools long term.
Well, I think that much was evident from the LPC meetings I attended. Everybody's heart was in the right place as far as expressing their opinions and also looking for the future of
I think talking about that committee, it might be important to talk about the people who are on it, how they came to be on it, and how they were chosen for this.
Yeah, so we started a committee in 2019. It was made up of 4 teachers, 4 principals, 4 parents, 3 community members, and really 2 or 3 other roles, like planning and zoning has a seat on there, which is part of the community, and then there's a maintenance director and so forth. But I think the 2019, the difference in that committee when it was originally set is there wasn't much at stake, because we didn't have a lot of we were just getting started in the job, and really I think it was a good example. We were only doing the local planning committee because we had to meet the requirement of doing the local planning committee.
Right.
We were all new to our jobs, and no one had a real sense of where the district's I think current reality was in the way that we do after 3 years. I say that to say, we made a shift. We reset the entire LPC largely because the previous LPC members did not fulfill the criteria. And I say that because there's a number of requirements in the manual that existed, right? And those requirements were not met by that prior LPC, so we reset the whole thing, went through the process locally. So local site-based decision-making teams were part of that for teachers. Local parent groups elected the parents, and then principals elected the principals, and then the board chose the community members. And the goal is diversity. You want to represent every part of the community as well as you can, and I think that was achieved in that there were 3 or 4 people from every part of the community, and from the major communities around Nelson County. And the diversity, I think the strength in the group was the diversity. There were lots of different perspectives in the conversations, and I couldn't have been more proud, really, of those of the people that chose to spend 15 to 20 hours of their life studying and analyzing and being a part of those conversations week after week. And while there was some controversy in the process, I think it made the committee stronger. And ironically, in the end, it allowed the committee to generate more depth in that conversation. So,
well, certainly. The committee was aware of differing points of views, and so there was no shortage of public input, which is by design.
Right. Yeah, that's also one of the pieces of feedback is that the process was rushed. I got an email about it just this week about it, and I think we had 25 public meetings. I'd say we probably had more public meetings than anybody in the state of Kentucky in the past year, and then some. And I think that's a part of this conversation is if the LPC is they're a part of this and that they represent a diverse lens. They've been thinking about these issues for decades in some cases. People at New Haven School have been thinking about the challenges and there for decades. So have the Boston community. In fact, talk about test scores. Boston has, if you will, the highest test scores. Everybody in the conversation from Boston sees the need for more opportunities for kids, right? So I use that as an example to go back to what really matters. And I think the parents and the teacher and the board member from Boston were part of that conversation. Were really, I think, spoke to how do we create more value for our kids, and they see this as an opportunity, even though it's going to require them to drive 20 minutes further at least at least for 3 years. So, just to review the timeline. This process, in best case scenario, would not occur in terms of transitioning students until August of 2024. So that's 2.5 years away. And that exists largely because any type of construction or remodeling or reorganization takes a long time.
Sure.
The LPC in this process took a long time. And the bureaucracy of government regulations, it's not going to move like the Newcombs can build a 5-star.
Right.
It's not going to go up in a few months or so. Right. It's going to take it takes a long time because there's a lot of controls around that money, the funding mechanisms.
There should be.
Well, on every construction project with the school, there's lots of steps that require Kentucky Department of Education approval.
Yeah, that's right.
But you're concentrating also on the primary schools, strengthening them.
We are, yeah. And so, there's in this plan, this is a 4-year plan, but in many cases, it could take longer than 4 years for pieces and parts of it. You've got major investment in the New Haven School, major investment in Cox's Creek School, which is approaching 30 years. The biggest investment is in the Nelson County campus, and then an addition at Thomas Nelson. So, that's the primary focus. We're still seeking grant money for the Area Technology Center, and pursuing additional opportunities there. It's unlikely that we would spend that money on the Area Technology Center in the short term, largely because of these other pressing needs around the district. Right.
Well, so what's the August 2024 would be the earliest, or is that kind of the target?
Yeah, when I say the earliest, I think for all the pieces and parts to come together, there are pieces and parts of it that can move before then.
Right.
But I think that's probably the best case scenario, and a lot of that depends on time, money, and this nature of inflation and how that impacts these other forces.
Right, because I know during the LPC meetings there were discussions about the high cost of construction, and that I think we will see some of those costs drop. Once we, as we move forward, when scarcities are taken care of, when supply chain issues are resolved.
Yeah, I think we all hope to see that. We know that inflation is a national conversation, and it's one that's highly politicized as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we're getting down to the wire, Wes. Anything else you want to leave with our listeners? I know. One of the messages I never really probably got across to Gazette readers was that all of the discussions about the community campus plan, that this didn't just come out of thin air. There'd been lots of work behind the scenes looking at this, and it just wasn't drawn on a napkin one day, and here we are.
Right.
You've got a team of a great team that supports you, and so that. Anyway, we look forward. It's going to be an exciting time, and I'm sure there'll be challenges, but those only make the end product more worthwhile when you tackle them.
I think the key message I would leave is that people in our community and all of our schools, whether it's Bardstown, Nelson County, our private schools here, people are working very hard. People want the best for kids.
Sure.
People are in these buildings coming together every day to take care of our community and to take care of a very diverse group of children. And I think that the key piece is that it's going to take all of us working together to continue to build better schools. It's going to take a neighborly attitude. It's going to take an approach that together we can. And that is the key idea. If you're not contributing proactively and positively to a conversation, then you're only taking from the conversation. And we're excited for the future. We're proud of the work going on in our classrooms and in our schools. We're proud of the leadership across our community, and I really feel like 2022 is going to be the strongest year we've had in some time as we come out of this pandemic.
All right. Well, I agree. I think 2022 holds great promise for the entire community on so many different fronts. Well, Wes, thank you for coming in today and being our guest again. We'll be back next Wednesday, and our guest next Wednesday will be 5th District Magistrate Eric Shelburne, who have filed recently to be as a Democratic candidate for Nelson County Judge Executive. So he will be on with us next week, and we'll have an opportunity to talk with him and judge his political ideas moving forward for the county. And it should be a great conversation.
Yeah. We're sort of starting off on our series here.
That's right, getting all the candidates in. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's Bradford and Brooks. Thank you all for listening. And again, thanks to our special guest, Wes Bradley, for being here. And we will be back next Wednesday with another Bradford and Brooks. Until then, have a great week, everybody.
Hometown Radio, you found it. 1320 AM, 97.1 FM in Bardstown, and 94.9 FM in Lebanon.
NBC.